It may be that in the distance a fish describes an arc of 3 or 4 feet in the air, and there is one bright flash where it emerges, and another where it strikes the water. Sometimes the whole silvery arc is revealed, or here and there, perhaps, is a thistledown floating on its surface, which the fishes dart at, and so dimple it again. It is like molten glass, cooled but not congealed, and the few motes in it are pure and beautiful, like the imperfections in glass. You may often detect a yet smoother and darker water, separated from the rest as if by an invisible cobweb, boom of the water nymphs resting on it. From a hilltop you can see a fish leap in almost any part, for not a pickerel or shiny picks an insect from the smooth surface, but it manifestly disturbs the equilibrium of the whole lake. It is wonderful with what elaborateness this simple fact is advertised. This pristine murder will out, and from my distant perch I distinguish the circling undulations when they are half a dozen rods in diameter. You can even detect a water bug ceaselessly progressing over the smooth surface, a quarter of a mile off, for they furrow the water slightly, making a conspicuous ripple bounded by 2 diverging lines, but the skaters glide over it without rippling it perceptibly. When the surface is considerably agitated, there are no skaters nor water bugs on it, but apparently, in calm days, they leave their havens and adventurously glide forth from the shore by short impulses till they completely cover it. It is a soothing employment on one of those fine days in the fall when all the warmth of the sun is fully appreciated, to sit on a stump in such a height as this, overlooking the pond, and study the dimpling circles which are insistently inscribed on its otherwise invisible surface amid the reflected skies and trees. Over this great expanse there is no disturbance, but it is thus at once gently smoothed away, and when a vase of water is jarred, the trembling circles seek the shore, and all is smooth again. Not a fish can leap or an insect fall on the pond, but it is thus reported in circling dimples, in lines of beauty, as it were the constant welling up of its fountain, the gentle pulsing of its life, the heaving of its breast. The thrills of joy and thrills of pain are undistinguishable. How peaceful the phenomena of the lake! Again the words of man shine as in spring. Ah, every leaf and twig and stone and cobweb sparkles now at mid-afternoon, as when covered with dew in a spring morning. Every motion of an oar or an insect produces a flash of light, and if an oar falls, how sweet the echo! In such a day in September or October, Walden is a perfect forest mirror, set round with stones as precious to my eye as a fewer or rarer. Nothing so fair, so pure, and at the same time so large as a lake. Perchance lies on the surface of the earth, sky water. It needs no fence. Nations come and go without defiling it. It is a mirror which no stone can crack, whose quicksilver will never wear off, whose gliding nature continually repairs. No storms, no dust can dim its surface, ever fresh, a mirror in which all impurity presented to it sinks, swept and dusted by the sun's hazy brush. This the light dust cloth, which retains no breath that is breathed on it, but sends its own to float as clouds high above its surface and be reflected in its bosom still. A field of water betrays the spirit that is in the air. It is continually receiving new life and motion from above. It is intermediate in its nature between land and sky. On land, only the grass and trees wave, but the water itself is rippled by the wind. I see where the breeze dashes across it by the streaks of flakes of light. It is remarkable that we can look down on its surface. We shall perhaps look down thus on the surface of air at length and mark where a still subtler spirit sweeps over it. The skaters and water bugs finally disappear in the latter part of October, when the severe frosts have come, and then in November, usually in a calm day, there is absolutely nothing to ripple the surface. One November afternoon, in the calm at the end of a rainstorm of several days' duration, when the sky was still completely overcast and the air was full of mist, I observed that the pond was remarkably smooth, so that it was difficult to distinguish its surface, though it no longer reflected the bright tints of October, but the somber November colors of the surrounding hills. Though I passed over it as gently as possible, the slight undulations produced by my boat extended almost as far as I could see, and gave a rippled appearance to the reflections. But, as I was looking over the surface, I saw here and there at a distance a faint glimmer, as if some skater insects which had escaped the frost might be collected there, or perchance the surface, being so smooth, betrayed where a spring welled up from the bottom. Paddling gently to one of those places, I was surprised to find myself surrounded by myriads of small perch, about 5 inches long, of a rich bronze color in the green water, sporting there and constantly rising to the surface and dimpling it, sometimes leaving bubbles on it. In such transparent and seemingly bottomless water, reflecting the clouds, I seemed to be floating through the air as in a balloon, and their swimming impressed me as a kind of flight or hovering, as if they were a compact flock of birds passing just beneath my level on the right or left, their fins, like sails, set all around them. There were many such schools in the pond, apparently improving the short season before winter could draw an icy shutter over their broad skylight, sometimes giving to the surface an appearance as if a slight breeze struck it, or a few raindrops fell there. When I approached carelessly and alarmed them, as if a slight breeze struck it or a few drops fell there, when I approached carelessly and alarmed them, they made a sudden plash and rippling with their tails, as if one had struck the water with a brushy bough and instantly took refuge in the depths. At length the wind rose, the mist increased, and the waves began to run, and the perch leaped much higher than before, half out of water, 100 black points, 3 inches long, at once above the surface. Even as late as the 5th of December, one year, I saw some dimples on the surface, and thinking it was going to rain hard immediately, the air began being full of mist. I made haste to take my place in the oars and row homeward. Already the rain seemed rapidly increasing, though I felt none on my cheek, and I anticipated a thorough soaking. But suddenly the dimples ceased, for they were produced by the perch, which the noise of my oars had scared into the depths, and I saw their schools dimly disappearing, so I spent a day afternoon after all. An old man who used to frequent this pond nearly 60 years ago, when it was dark with surrounding forests, tells me that in those days he sometimes saw it all alive with ducks and other waterfowl, and that there were many eagles about it. He came here a-fishing and used an old log canoe which he found on the shore. It was made of 2 white pine logs dug out and pinned together and was cut off square at the ends. It was very clumsy, but lasted a great many years before it became waterlogged and perhaps sank to the bottom. He did not know whose it was. It belonged to the pond. He used to make a cable for his anchor of strips of hickory bark tied together. An old man, a potter, who lived by the pond before the Revolution, told him once that there was an iron chest at the bottom, and that he had seen it. Sometimes it would come floating up to the shore, but when you went toward it, it would go back into water and disappear. I was pleased to hear of the old log canoe, which took the place of an Indian one of the same material but more graceful construction, which perchance had first been a tree on the bank and then, as it were, fell into the water to float there for a generation, the most proper vessel for the lake. I remember that when I first looked into these depths, there were many large trunks to be seen indistinctly lying on the bottom, which had either been blown over formerly or left on the ice at the last cutting when wood was cheaper, but now they have mostly disappeared. When I first paddled a boat on Walden, it was completely surrounded by thick and lofty pine and oak woods, and in some of its coves, grapevines had run over the trees next to the water and formed bowers under which a boat could pass. The hills which form its shores are so steep, and the woods on them were then so high, that as you looked down from the west end, it had the appearance of an amphitheater for some kind of sylvan spectacle. I have spent many an hour when I was younger floating over its surface, as the zephyr willed, having paddled my boat to the middle and lying on my back across the seats, in a summer forenoon, dreaming awake until I was aroused by the boat touching the sand. And I rose to see what shore my fates had impelled me to, days when idleness was the most attractive and productive industry. Many a forenoon have I stolen away, preferring to spend thus the most valued part of the day, for I was rich, if not in money, in sunny hours and summer days, and spent them lavishly. Nor do I regret that I did not waste more of them in the woodshop, the workshop, or the teacher's desk. But since I left those shores, the woodchoppers have still further laid them waste, and now for many a year there will be no more rambling through the aisles of the wood, with occasional vistas through which you see the water. My muse may be excused if she is silent henceforth. How can you expect the birds to sing when their groves are cut down? Now the trunks of trees on the bottom, and the old log canoe, and the dark surrounding woods are gone, and the villagers, who scarcely know what it lies, instead of going to the pond to bathe or drink, are thinking to bring its water, which should be as sacred as the Ganges, at least, to the village in a pipe, to wash their dishes with, to earn their Walden by the turning of a cook or drawing of a plug. That devilish iron horse, whose ear-rending neigh is heard throughout the town, has muddied the boiling spring with his foot, and he it is that has browsed off all the woods on Walden shore, that Trojan horse, with 1,000 men in his belly, introduced by mercenary Greeks. Where is the country's champion, the Moor of Moorhall, to meet him at the deep cut, and thrust an avenging lance between the ribs of the bloated pest? Nevertheless, all of the characters I have known, perhaps Walden wears best, and best preserve its purity. Many men have been likened to it, but few deserved it at that honor. Through the woodchippers have laid bare first this shore and then that, and the Irish have built their sites by it, and the railroad has infringed on its border, and the icemen have skimmed it once. It is itself unchanged, the same water which my youthful eye fell on. All the change is in me. It has not acquired one permanent wrinkle after all its ripples. It is permanently young, and I may stand and see a swallow dip, apparently to pick an insect from its surface, as of yore. It struck me again tonight, as if I had not seen it almost daily for more than 20 years. Why, here is Walden, the same woodland lake that I discovered so many years ago. Where a forest was cut down last winter, another is springing up by its shores as lustily as ever. The same thought is welling up to its surface that was then. It is the same liquid joy and happiness to itself and its maker. Aye, it may be to me. It is the work of a brave man, surely, in whom there was no guile. He rounded this water with his hand, deepened and clarified in it his thought, and in his will bequeathed it to concord. I see by its fare that it is visited by the same reflection, and I can almost say, Walden, is it you? It is no dream of mine to ornament a line. I cannot come nearer to God in heaven than I live to Walden even. I am its stony shore, and the breeze that passes o'er, in the hollow of my hand, and its water and its sand, and its deepest resort lies high in my thought. The cars never pause to look at it, yet I fancy that the engineers and firemen and brakemen and those passengers who have a season ticket and see it often are better men for the sight. The engineer does not forget at night, or his nature does not, that he has beheld this vision of serenity and purity once at least during the day. Though seen but once, it helps to wash out State Street and the engine's soot. One proposes that it be called God's Drop. I have said that Walden has no visible inlet nor outlet, but it is on the one hand distantly and indirectly related to Flint's Pond, which is more elevated by a chain of small ponds coming from that quarter, and on the other directly and manifestly to Concord River, which is lower, by a similar chain of ponds through which it is some other geological period it may have flowed, and by the little digging, which God forbid, it can be made to flow thither again. If by living thus reserved and austere, like a hermit in the woods, so long it has acquired such wonderful purity, who would not regret that the comparatively impure waters of Flint's Pond should be mingled with it, or itself should ever go to waste its sweetness in the ocean wave. Flint's, or Sandy Pond in Lincoln, our greatest lake and inland sea, lies about a mile east of Walden. It is much larger, being said to contain 197 acres, and is more fertile in fish, but is comparatively shallow and not remarkably pure. A walk through the woods thither was often my reaction. It was worth the while, even only to feel the wind blow on your cheek freely, and see the waves run, and remember the life of mariners. I went chestnutting there in the fall on windy days, when the nuts were dropping into the water and were washed to my feet, and one day, as I crept along its sedgy shore, the fresh spray blowing in my face, I came upon the moldering wreck of a boat, the sides gone and hardly more than the impression of its flat bottom left amid the rushes, yet its model was sharply defined, as if it were a large decayed pad with its veins. It was as impressive a wreck as one could imagine on the seashore, and had as good a moral. It is by this time more vegetable mold and undistinguishable pond shore, though which rushes and flags have pushed up. I used to admire the ripple marks on the sandy bottom at the north end of this pond, made firm and hard to the feet of the wader by the pressure of the water, and the rushes which grew in Indian file, in waving lines, corresponding to these marks, rank behind rank, as if the waves planted them. There also I have found in considerable quantities curious balls composed apparently of fine grass of roots, of pipewort perhaps, from half an inch to 4 inches in diameter, and perfectly spherical. These wash back and forth in shallow water on a sandy bottom, and are sometimes cast on the shore. They are either solid grass or have a little sand in the middle. At first you would say that they were formed by the action of the waves, like a pebble, yet the smallest are made of equally coarse materials, half an inch long, and they are produced only at one season of the year. Moreover, the waves, I suspect, do not so much construct as wear down a material which has already acquired consistency. They preserve their form when dry for an indefinite period. Flint's Pond. Such is the poverty of our nomenclature. What right had the unclean and stupid farmer whose farm abutted on the sky water, whose shore he has ruthlessly laid bare, to give him his name to it? Some skinflint who loved better the reflecting surface of a dollar, or a bright scent in which he could see his own brazen face, who regarded even the wild ducks which settled in as trespassers, his fingers grown into crooked and horny talons from the long habit of grasping happy-like, so it is not named for me. I go not there to see him, nor to hear of him, who never saw it, who never bathed in it, who never loved it, who never protected it, who never spoke a good word for it, nor thanked God that he had made it. Rather, let it be named from the fishes that swim in it, the wild fowl of quadrupeds which frequent it, the wild flowers which grow by its shores, or some wild man or child, the thread of whose history is interwoven with its own, not from him who could show no title to it but the deed which a like-minded neighbor or legislature gave him who thought only of its money value, whose present pensions cursed all the shores, who exhausted the land around it, and would fain have exhausted the waters within it, who regretted only that it was not English hay or cranberry meadow. There was nothing to redeem it, forsooth, in his eyes, and would have drained and sold it for the mud at its bottom. It did not turn his mill, and it was no privilege to him to behold it. I respect not his labors, his farm, where everything has its price, who would carry the landscape, who would carry his God to market if he could get anything for him, Who goes to market for his God, as it is, and whose farm nothing grows free, whose fields bear no crop, whose meadows no flowers, whose trees no fruit but dollars? Who loves not the beauty of its fruits, whose fruits are not ripe from him till they are turned to dollars? Give me the poverty that enjoys true wealth. Farmers are respectable and interesting to me in proportion as they are poor farmers. A model farm, where the house stands like a fungus in a muck heap. Chambers for men, horses, oxen, and swine, cleansed and uncleansed, all contagious to one another. Stocked with men, a great, great spot, redolent of manures and buttermilk. Under a high state of cultivation, being manured with the hearts and brains of men. As if you were to raise your potatoes in the churchyard. Such is a model farm. No, no. It's the fairest features of the landscape are to be named after men. Let them be the noblest and worthiest men alone. Let our lakes receive as true names, at least as the Icarian Sea, where still the shore a brave attempt resounds.